This is Join Us in France, episode 205. Bonjour, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you want to learn about because hopefully you'll be visiting soon. On today's episode, a trip report with Jennifer Warner about the World War I sites that she visited with her family earlier this year. World War I, that's hard to say, ended on November 11th, 1918. So we are celebrating the Centennial Anniversary of the end of the Great War. Many of the sites we mention on this episode will be holding special celebrations and special events to mark the centennial. So 2018 is a great year to visit World War I memorial sites. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on the show and sharing so many great tips about your trip to France. Honestly, I couldn't do this show week in and week out without wonderful listeners like you, Jennifer, who decide to do a trip report with me. I have several episodes recorded and lined up for the next few weeks, but if you had an episode-worthy trip to France, I'd love to have you on the show. Right now, I'd love to have guests who had a bit of a different experience than what you usually hear on the show. Maybe you were traveling with a family group that included several generations. Maybe you were doing a solo trip. Maybe you had something spectacularly good or spectacularly bad happen to you during your trip. Maybe you went someplace that we never talked about on the show so far. If that's you, please reach out to me, Annie at joinusinfrance.com with the subject line episode proposal. Also, a heads up, I'll release an episode next week, so that'll be September 19th, 2018. And it'll be about the Tour du Mont Blanc with Lachlan Cook. But there won't be a new episode on September 26th because I'll be touring around the Dordogne with a group. And so there won't be any time for podcast production. So I'll be back on the following week, October 3rd. At this point in the episode, I'd normally tell you that if you're interested in World War I, you should also listen to episode XYZ for more on the same subject. But this is our first time talking about World War I in depth on this podcast. So I will direct you instead to the French history section on the website, joinusinfrance.com. Then click on the interest tab and then French history. For show notes and photos on this episode, go to joinusinfrance.com/205, the number 205. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest with zero stress. I will be announcing new dates for tours around Toulouse shortly. We did discuss it with Elise, and so it's going to happen very soon now. Join Us in France needs your support. To see all the ways you can support the show, visit joinusinfrance.com/support. Hello, Jennifer, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's lovely to have you. So today we're going to talk about your visit to France, which was when again?
We were there at the end of June and early July this past summer.
2018.
Yes.
Very good. And you visited a lot of sites that have to do with World War I. So in the Alsace area and the north of France area. Why? What was the interest for you? Why did you choose to do that?
Well, so my husband and I both really enjoy history, and we have two teenage sons who are 14 and 16 who also enjoy history. We were looking to do a big trip this summer. And with the centennial of World War I, we figured France was the place to be.
Yes, because it's this year. So there were probably extra celebrations and extra displays and that sort of thing.
Actually, I was surprised there wasn't too much in the way of celebrations. That's probably mostly going to be in November. But the museums had clearly been perked up leading up to the Centennial. So all the museums seemed newer and more informative.
That's wonderful. That's very good. Okay, so you listened to the show, I assume, or you wouldn't have talked to me. How did you use the show to prepare for your trip? Because we haven't talked about that part of France that much.
Yeah. Well, so we knew we would be renting a car. So my husband he'd Googled up, like driving in France, and he found your podcast and he mentioned it to me. So he really listened to the driving one. But I started listening to a bunch of the other episodes, and there's not too much in that area, but I found a lot of helpful tips just kind of mixed in on all the episodes, you know, like dealing with French people saying hello and goodbye all the time. Also, just tidbits here and there about, this city and that city.
Right. Because what's true of Paris and the places we've talked about the most, I think, is Paris, Normandy, and the Southwest. Well, what applies in those places also applies in the rest of France, really. I mean, it's, as far as the general advice and general vibe of the place.
Yeah, exactly. I know my kids got a little tired because I kept saying, well, when I was listening to the podcast.
They were sick and tired of me.
Maybe a little.
Of course. I listen to the podcast as well. And sometimes I just say, shut up, lady, and I'm the one talking. Anyway. All right.
Well, I've enjoyed it, so it's all been good.
Oh, good. Okay, so let's talk in some detail about where you went and what you saw.
Okay, so we were there about 2.5 weeks, and we did do about a week in Paris, and we also did visit Normandy, but really the focus, as you said, was on World War I. So we went to Verdun, which is kind of on the east of France,
right,
northeast of France,
right,
and then we went, and then we went over to Arras, which is way on the other side, on the far northwest of France.
Right. So Verdun it's about an hour west of Metz, in the general area of the Alsace, and then Arras is in just north of Paris. Between the two, it's about 4 hours drive. If you were going to do it, just get on the freeway and go.
And that's what we did. Yeah.
Okay. And that you didn't encounter any big problems there? Nothing shocking?
No, not at all. Well, I was surprised at how the highways, the toll roads, there were 2 lanes, but man, traffic moved perfectly. I couldn't believe how well traffic moved. So they were expensive, but they were nice. And we felt when we were going great distances, they were totally worth the toll roads. Yeah,
because especially now, if you take the National, so the free roads, you have to go 80 kilometers per hour unless there's a divider in the middle. That's a new rule that started on July 1st. And
yeah, we know.
Yeah. And that feels terribly slow. I mean, it's like, oh, when am I going to get there?
Yeah. We hit that. We were there on July 1st. And so really only in a few places the signage had changed. So we kept it at 90. And we haven't gotten a ticket yet.
If you haven't gotten it, you won't get it. I don't think it's been long enough that you would have gotten it by now, unless your car rental company is very, very slow.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure they'd be quick on that.
Yeah. Okay, so Verdun. What did you see around Verdun, and what did you particularly like?
So we had done a little bit of research ahead of time. Being Americans, we weren't that involved in World War I, and we really don't study it in school. We mostly focus on the peace treaty. So just kind of using Wikipedia and a book about France, we chose Verdun, and we did the museum, and then we chose two of the forts. We went and saw Fort Vaux and Fort Douaumont.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I'll just add a little bit here, is that after the war of 1871 against the Prussians, they decided to add fortifications around Verdun. And they had built 38 forts or defensive systems around the city of Verdun, which is strange because it's not that big a city. Even at the time, there was like 15,000, I think. And even today, it's like 20,000 people. It's not a very large city. Anyway, they had built all these forts. And then so that was 1870. And then by the time the First World War happened, so 1814, they had pretty much abandoned. They had decided, well, we don't want to defend ourselves this way. The best defense is the offense. And so we just want to have our troops moving all the time, line them up and have them move forward. And it was devastating because they ended up with forts that were empty and that the Germans took very easily.
Yeah, and I guess for some reason, I'm not really sure, some of the forts around Verdun were reinforced in the early 1900s. So they had originally been built as just like big stone block forts like you see in movies.
Yeah.
But a couple of the forts were reinforced, and Fort Vaux-en-Douxmont were both one of those reinforced ones.
Mm-hmm.
So they poured concrete on them, and then they encased them in sand and dirt. And so they no longer look like forts. They were more like kind of buried underground.
Yeah.
And it was really neat seeing them.
Yeah, it's very different. Visually, it's very different. And you sent me some photos that I'll put on the episode post for this episode that people should look at. It's very interesting to see visually. It's very different.
Yeah. I mean, they were almost like dugouts.
Yeah. And so many things happened. So I'm not even going to try and tell you the story of this war because it's just crazy how many things happened. And what, I listened to a book about this. I think it's called, what was that book called? I just listened to it twice. A World Undone by J.G. Meyer. No, is it J.G. or is it G.J.? It's opposite. It's G. So it's GJ, I think. Sorry. It's opposite to the French letters, so I get confused. Anyway, A World Undone, it's a great book. It goes into great detail. And, it's so sad, the number of deaths that they had. It's just really sobering. I mean, by the hundreds of thousands, some of these battles. Sometimes they would say, and Bataille de la Somme, 100,000 died on one side only. Like, what?
Yeah, it's shocking when you see some of the memorials that we saw later, just how many people died in one battle. And then you think that there were numerous battles every year, and it went on for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's just
crazy.
It's shocking.
It's crazy. And the other thing that you can see, even if you never go to visit Verdun or Arras or any of these beautiful places that have to do with First World War, any French village will have a memorial. And
we saw a lot of those.
Right. And you will have a tiny village with 50 people, and the list of the young men mostly who died from that village is sometimes 200 or 300. And it's just, it doesn't make any sense. But at the end of First World War, they got to calling into the army people who were 16, men up to 45, just to be foot soldiers, because it's pretty common for officers to be older, but a foot soldier at 45 is like crazy. They started calling people from the colonies, and my family, my grandparents were in Algeria, in the French colony in Algeria, and both of my grandfathers served in Verdun in different capacities. And if you read up the history, the longer the war goes on, the more they called these men from overseas. So it would be a battalion from any of the French colonies, and there were a lot of them at the time.
Yeah, it truly is one of those wars where everybody got involved, and I was particularly struck by the 16-year-olds. My oldest is 16, and the thought of sending him off even to the grocery store. Sometimes I look at him and it's like, yeah, don't forget the milk. Sending him off to war.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
I couldn't imagine doing that.
Right. And at the beginning of First World War anyway, the reason why it couldn't be avoided is because people were hankering for war. They thought that they had scores to be settled, and they thought they were...
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, they wanted to settle those scores once and for all, which of course didn't happen.
Didn't work out.
No, it didn't work out. And France and Germany had been at this for centuries. If you just look at the Battle of Verdun, I think the earliest one was in the 800s.
Yeah, and that was just at the Verdun Museum. They discussed kind of why Verdun and what happened there, and there was a little section about, and the museum does a lot with both the French side and the German side. Mm-hmm. And so it discussed kind of the past history. And this poor little tiny town, like you said, it's not very large, but it's very quaint, had been fought over for a century.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And it's not even like it controls some great waterway or, there's nothing particularly significant about this town.
Right. It just
kept getting fought over.
Yeah. It was the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately, a lot. And
yes.
and then this problem. I mean, to me it's a problem. All of these wars, they always wanted to take Paris. And I suggest they might want to try Brussels next time, or I don't know, Zurich, or just go pick on another capital. There's lots of them in Europe. Just leave Paris alone, okay?
Well, it's such a beautiful city. Who doesn't want to go there?
No, but it's crazy. They just always wanted to take Paris. In this book, that was the reoccurring theme: is they were going to push forward until they captured Paris. I'm like, geez, just leave it alone. Anyway, that's... And then in terms of, we keep mentioning French and German casualties. The English they actually lost, I think, let me see, military dead. They lost almost 1 million. France, over 1 million. USA, 116,000.
We only really fought for the last few months. We didn't start fighting until I think the late spring of 18.
Right.
So we weren't there the whole time.
Right.
The French and the English and of course the Germans were there on the Western Front.
Right.
And just slogging away. It's unbelievable.
And Australians lost, the Australians
and the Kiwis
and then
also Italy, and then all the Balkan. It really was a world war.
Right. So for people who don't really know much about this, the belligerents, they were the Allied powers. So that was French, British, Russia, Belgium, United States, other countries. And the Central Powers, that was Germany, Austria, Turkey, and Bulgaria, mostly, were the ones in that side. And there were battles all over Europe, and there were also battles far, far away from Europe that had to do with this whole thing.
Yeah, there were battles in Africa and over in Asia. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy when you see how far it reached.
Yeah. So what is it like visiting Verdun? What did you think? How did it feel?
So we didn't spend much time in the city. We were mostly at the battlefield. So as you mentioned, it's not really like a battlefield. It's a ring of forts.
Right.
And so it's really spread out. You have to have a car to do it. Mm-hmm. And as we were driving along, you'd have a mix of farmland and trees. And wherever there were trees on the side of the road, you'd often come across signposts that had memorials, pointing to like a memorial to a group or a battalion, or a small graveyard where a handful of people were buried. And you also had pretty much everywhere we started calling them the red signs, and they'd be tacked to trees saying, "Don't go here because there's unexploded ordnance and it's not safe."
Wow.
And that was just bizarre to see. It's been 100 years,
Right.
And that you could walk around somewhere and still find things. And from what I understand, it's far less common now,
right?
But they do still find things.
Occasionally, they make a big dig for something, a house or something like that, and they do find stuff.
Yeah. So it's just crazy that that's still an issue. And as we were driving along, we came across a bunch of the abandoned villages. And I think it's like Village Detroit or something like that. We'd see signs.
Village détruit. Détruit.
Yes. DETRUIT. Yes. Well, it's really close to the spelling of the city of Detroit in Michigan. So our not good French, we just called them Village Detroit. But we ended up seeing 3 of them, and they just pop up as you're driving along.
Uh-huh.
And they were just so sad. Each one was a little bit different, but they'd all been left to go back to nature. So there were trees growing up where in a village there probably wouldn't be a bunch of trees, but they're still maintained. There's a mayor for, I think there's 8 or 9 official abandoned villages. And there's a mayor who's responsible for maintaining these villages.
Right.
And the ground is all pockmarked, so you can't walk anywhere really. You're always going up and down and into a shell hole, over a shell hole. And in some of them, they have bits of foundation left. And we looked at one where it had signposts and it said, right here was Mr. X's house and over here was Mrs. Y's bakery.
Right.
And you're just looking at it and I couldn't help but think and explain to my boys that people had probably been living in these villages for a couple hundred years. Their families had always been there. Mm-hmm. And in the course of 4 years, it got so damaged that you couldn't go back.
Yeah.
And that, looking at that, it really brought home how much devastation there was.
Yeah, it was staggering for the people too. They lost, I think France lost like 10% of the male population died or was never heard from again. And so even after the war, imagine going home and all the young men are, are gone. They're gone. And
then, in these villages, the people were forced to leave in a hurry and they come back to nothing. And, their men might be dead. Their husbands and sons might have passed away in the war. And now they've also lost their home, their whole village. Mm-hmm. One thing my husband thought was interesting was because they are still technically villages, they still have the town speed limit. So you'd be driving along at 90 and then all of a sudden you'd come to a point and it would be 50. A village and you were supposed to slow down to 50, which kind of, brought home the fact that these were places where people lived and could not live anymore.
That's right. Yeah, I was just looking over the number of civilian dead on the Allied side. It was 4 million, and for the Central Powers, it was 3.7 million. So, yeah, imagine what that would do to whole countries.
Yeah.
We're devastated. And so how much time did you spend visiting the area of Verdun?
So we went to, when we first arrived, we got there in the afternoon and we went to the museum and kind of drove around in that afternoon. So, I'd say maybe a total of 4 hours then. And then the next morning we got up and we went to Fort Vaux and Fort Douaumont. And that was probably about another 4 hours. I think it'd be hard to do it in just one day. Mm-hmm. But if you're ambitious and speedy, you probably could.
Mm-hmm.
it was nice kind of breaking it up.
Right. So Verdun, so you mentioned the museum. Is it, I mean, like in Normandy, you can't say the museum because there's a bazillion of them. Is there a major museum in Verdun?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's called the Verdun Memorial.
Okay.
But in everything I saw in English called it the Verdun Museum.
Okay.
And it's the only one we saw, and it had recently been renovated maybe within the last 10 years, and it was fantastic. We, being Americans, we didn't know much about it, and it did an amazing job explaining a little bit about the war, but mostly focused on Verdun. And what we really enjoyed was how much it spoke of the soldiers' experiences.
Yeah.
And how they survived the war, basically. One thing that we all kind of laughed about was they had an exhibit on mail, on notes to and from home. And in this day and age, we fire off a text or something like that.
Yeah.
But back then, of course, no cell phones, and letters were so important.
Of course.
And so we were laughing about, in the beginning of the war, all the soldiers still had to put postage on their letters. So they'd have to write a letter, find paper, find the time to write it. And then they'd have to go back and they'd have to find money to buy a stamp.
Yeah.
And then mail it off. And I guess within short order, the French government decided that was probably not the best way to treat these poor soldiers.
Yeah.
So any letters that went to the front or came from the front lines became free. And they were talking about the number of letters that were sent by the French troops and also by the German troops. And it's just staggering how many letters were going back and forth.
Yeah.
And they had little excerpts from some of them. And it's just so sweet. Some of these letters, they're asking about, how's the farm doing? And is, little Pierre walking yet?
Yeah.
And, just to be in the middle of the war and still focused on your family, which was probably about the one bright thing you had going in your life.
That's right. That's what they wanted to think about.
Exactly. So the museum was excellent. I think it was a good place to start, and it really kind of made us understand what was going on and why there was a battle there. And so, and I know both my boys enjoyed it. And then also, as an added bonus, the tourist information is attached to the museum. So we were able to get a little bit of additional information about the area there.
That's cool. And then if you only had time to see Vaux or Douaumont, which one would you pick?
We all enjoyed Vaux a lot.
Okay.
It was fantastic.
Okay.
It's really small, but the story attached to it is just so inspirational that it was a lot more interesting to us. The nice thing about the museum, about both the forts, both Vaux and Douaumont, is that when you pay your admittance fee, it comes with an audio tour.
Okay.
And so on that little audio tour, it also has a little tiny video screen. So you'd punch in the room that you were in, like 101 or something.
Right.
And it would tell you about that room. And in the room, they also had signage. But especially for kids, they like hearing it. And sometimes on the audio thing, it would show like a little video clip or a map that was helpful.
Excellent. Okay, very good to know. Yeah, I think I have been to Fort Douaumont, but it's been years, and so I'm not sure. I've been to Verdun. I've been to the ossuary that we're going to talk about next. I remember that, because that's the one that really struck me. But as far as, did I go to Vaux, Douaumont, both? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's been years. So let's talk a little bit about the ossuary. You mentioned it as one of the places you went to.
Right. So we did not actually go into the ossuary. We walked around it, and then in front is a whole cemetery of French dead from Verdun, and it's by no means all of them.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. It's sitting on a small hill, and it slopes down to the trees, and you have a beautiful view of the surrounding area. But to see that view, you have to look across all of these these gravestones, which are set up in crosses.
Mm-hmm.
Although there was a good number of Muslim people who fought, and their graves were all angled towards Mecca and were obviously not crosses.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. And one thing that I thought was beautiful was in front of each headstone was a small rose bush.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was just, you have the green grass and the white headstones and the red rose bush. It was very moving. And that was our first real encounter with the number of dead.
Yeah. And
so you look at that, and at the ossuary, it's a huge building, and on the outside, it has, I guess, the shields of all the towns around France where people were from that had passed away, and you just see this scrolling list of all the towns. It seems like every single town
everywhere
had people.
Yeah, everywhere. And because Verdun was in 1916, which was relatively later in the war, they had started calling a lot of people from the colonies, like I mentioned before, and so obviously a lot of these men who were fighting were Muslims because they came from Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia and other French colonies where there were a lot of Muslims.
Right. And I thought it was nice that even back in 1918, people, when they were setting up the cemetery, people cared enough about their religion, about the Muslim religion, to do the graves so they were facing Mecca.
Right.
And
be respectful.
Exactly. I thought it was just very respectful to all the troops.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I would recommend you go to the ossuary. We went inside. The number of bones you see is just... Because there's places where you actually walk over plexiglass and you have like an entire sea of bones underneath. Because they identified they're identified by name because they knew who was in what regiment, but they weren't able to. They had so many dead they couldn't bury them, and the Germans did the same. Like at Douaumont, there's an area where like 900 Germans or something died, and they just walled them in.
Yeah, there was an explosion there, and so many of them were buried in the explosion. And I thought that was very interesting at Douaumont that, it's a French fort in a French town, and they have an official German cemetery in this fort where all these German soldiers had died.
Well, they died there, so they're people.
They died there, and I just thought that was very, very interesting. I like very much that it was no longer a "you're my enemy" situation.
Yeah.
It was we fought and we died, and we'll honor all our dead.
Right. Yeah, because none of these men were involved in deciding to go to war. I know a lot of them believed in the cause, but that doesn't make them responsible. It was the leaders who messed things up royally. Right,
and most of these soldiers believed even more strongly in getting their crops in or maintaining their business.
Yeah.
They did what they had to do when their country called them up. But as you said, they were definitely not sitting there saying, I would love to go out and fight in a war.
No. But, and it used to be that soldiers used to leave the front to go harvest or to go help out, and it was important because otherwise the country would starve. And this is something that changed at World War I. Other things changed, like airplanes used,
and machine guns.
Machine guns. The whole business of machine guns shooting around the propellers. That was a big invention of World War I. Tanks were unheard of until World War I. They really brought a lot of innovations. Well, they are innovations. They're killing machine innovations, but they are innovations.
It's very funny because with World War I, you do have all those innovations. Cars had been invented and airplanes were used and all. But still you see so much of the old school. When we were at Fort Vaux, it was eventually captured after kind of a heroic stand by the French. And the commander of Vaux famously sent a communication. His telephone lines were dead and all means of communications were gone. And he sent a letter by a pigeon. And he said, "This is my last pigeon. We need help or we have to surrender."
Wow.
And we're just sitting there and it's like, by pigeon? And sure enough. And in the Verdun Museum, they did talk about the contribution animals made.
Yeah.
Like, so much of everything was moved around by horses and mules because cars weren't reliable and the roads were definitely not up to snuff for an automobile.
Yep.
So you had that real mix of new technology and old-fashioned ways.
Right. And one of my grandfathers, that was actually his job, was to put shoes on horses. That was his job his whole life, not just at Verdun. And also he made wheels for carts. You know, the big horse-drawn carts, the big wheels, wooden wheels with the metal around. That's what he did. And that's what he did at Verdun. And then my other grandfather, and I'm not sure, and they've all passed away, so I can't ask the question anymore. But he worked in mines. He set up explosives for mining. And I don't know if he learned how to do that in the war and then did it in the civilian world, or vice versa. I'm not sure, but they both survived the wars because they both had very skilled jobs, and those men weren't, in the line of fire directly. They were doing other things. So
that was fortunate. Fortunate for them, and then eventually fortunate for you.
Right. Yes, indeed. I wouldn't be the same. I wouldn't be here, I guess. That, you never know. I don't know how these things work, but I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be me for sure. All right, so let's move on to the Arras area. What did you see there, and did it compare?
It was very different. We enjoyed both very much. I think my boys enjoyed Verdun more because it seemed kind of more traditional war to them. And they're both active, so we tried to keep the number of museums and memorials to a minimum so that they would enjoy it also.
Yep.
But Arras was, it's so far west, it's obviously going to be much different than Verdun. And so we went to Vimy Ridge, and we went in the Thiepval Memorial, which is part of the Somme. And then in Arras itself, they have tunnels under the town. So we went in those. And then we went to the Wellington tunnels, which were used in World War I. And then there's a big town square, which is nothing like I expected. And it was just a neat area. I'm glad we went there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess Arras was originally, or at least for 100 or 200 years, part of the Spanish Netherlands. So the town square, it's a huge cobblestone town square, and all the buildings around it look like they're straight out of Amsterdam. They have, they're really tall and really narrow.
Skinny, yeah.
And so it was just bizarre. We're looking around, and it was beautiful and not at all what we expected. And then, like you mentioned, your grandfather had done explosives in tunnels. Yeah. So the whole Arras area is just, there's tunnels underground everywhere.
Right.
And we'd heard mention of it, but we really didn't know much about that. And we went in so many tunnels there and saw so many unexpected neat things that it was just really, really interesting.
Yeah, they look really interesting. The photos you sent me are very interesting. Yeah, so the Somme is the two big battles. If you've heard anything about World War I in France, it's going to be Verdun and la Bataille de la Somme, which were both huge. And so Verdun was Alsace and Somme was in the Arras area. It's the name of the department. And
and they were going on about the same time.
Yes, pretty much. Well, I think Bataille de la Somme was a little after.
I think Yeah, I think
or maybe they
Verdun
overlapped
started
a
in the
little bit.
spring.
Yeah. Yeah, they overlapped a little bit because I think Verdun was. Oh, I'm gonna say something stupid, but I'm thinking it was definitely 1916. Maybe it was March or April or something, and it went
Yeah, and
on
then it
for
went
9
through
months.
until like early winter.
Yeah,
And the Somme was like in the summer of 16, I
right.
think.
So they overlapped a little bit, and they were the two big battles that had the most impressive number of casualties and heroism that goes along with all of that.
Yeah.
So where did you stay? Did you stay in Arras?
Yeah, so we stayed in Ross. We got an Airbnb and we were just about 3 or so blocks from the town square. So it was a fantastic location.
Uh-huh.
Arras feels like a very small town, but I don't think it is. It seemed like it had suburbs going out from it.
Yeah.
But staying in the center of it, it was fantastic. We really enjoyed being able to walk up to the town square where there were plenty of restaurants to eat.
Mm-hmm.
We got some really yummy ice cream on one of the really hot days.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very nice staying in Arras, and we were able to walk to quite a bit.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and I'm sure it's a friendly town. I mean, I've never been to Arras, honestly, but I'm sure it's. I had a good friend in school who was from there. She was super friendly. I don't know about the rest of the people, but that's my impression of them.
Well, so when we were in Paris, as you had said, most people will be able to speak some English, and we always tried in French, but our French is pathetically sad. So most people would switch over to English.
Uh-huh.
But when we went basically when we left Paris, it was pretty much French only.
Mm-hmm.
And people were just so generous in their patience as we were trying to explain what we wanted. And everybody was just so kind.
Yeah.
As, you know, I have new understanding and appreciation for tourists that come to DC and can't speak English. And I'll remind myself to be more patient.
Be patient because hopefully they're trying. Hopefully they're trying.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That's all you can ask, really.
Yeah, it was a really pretty town. It had a very different feel, and we really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, and around the Somme, there's lots of different things you can do. There's this thing called the Circuit du Souvenir. So, and that's just for the Battle of the Somme. It goes to a place called Péronne, Albert, and Beaumont-Hamel. These were really important places. Did you visit any of those?
Well, we tried to visit the last one. We called it. Yes,
Beaumont.
We did not pronounce it as beautifully as you do. We tried to get there, but we kept getting lost.
Oh,
so we kind of found a bit of it, and then we stumbled upon something else. Well, in our search for it, there was this massive crater. That is being restored by a group of British retirees.
Oh.
And if you've ever seen a video of an explosion in the Somme, where like this huge spray of dirt goes into the air, that's this crater. It's the Newfoundland crater, I think it's called, and it's right across from the Beaumont Havel Cemetery.
Okay.
All
right.
And this thing is unbelievably immense. Yeah, it's maybe 10 meters down, like 30 feet down. And I can't tell you how far across it goes. It was immense.
You wonder what kind of bomb did that. That must have
that was tunneling, actually. They tunneled it twice. They exploded it once at the beginning of the Somme in, I think, July. And that did not go well because timing was off. And then they did another one at the end. I think that was November. And that one went much better. But it's, you see these craters. We saw them at Verdun, and then we saw them all around the Arras area. And it's just remarkable the amount of destruction
Yeah.
To the land, and obviously to humans. But you see the leftovers of these bombs and these tunnels that 100 years later are still dotting the countryside.
Yeah. And the whole idea of World War I was kind of stand your ground, was move forward as much as you can, and if you can't, at least stand your ground. And they would sometimes fight over and over again for the same field or the same hill, and so the French would have it, and then the Germans would take it, and then it would be some British army division that would come back and do it again, and gain it again, and then lose it again, and a lot of these, to me, seemed pointless. Like, why do you care about this hill so much? To me, it's hard for me to fathom what was the strategy behind all of this. I still don't see it. I've listened to this whole book twice, and I still don't see the strategy. What were they trying to achieve? I don't know.
Well, I think in the grand scheme of things with most wars, the whole beginning premise was probably not the best, that we're so angry we have to go and kill lots of people.
Yeah.
So when you start with the whole beginning of the war,
that was a mess.
It seems like it seems like the battles make no more and no less sense than the whole premise of the war.
Yeah.
I know when we went to Vimy Ridge, that's I guess about 10 minutes north of Arras. And so that's where the Canadians kind of came into their own. And France actually gave the battlefield and memorial site to the nation of Canada. And the whole museum and area is staffed by Canadian kids. So college kids apply to come over, and they'll come over for about 3 or 4 months at a time.
Well, that's nice.
And they're the ones that lead the tours.
Oh, nice.
And we really enjoyed that. It was a very well done tour. They took us through some tunnels, and they have restored trench lines. And so the whole premise of it was the Canadians were told, you have to capture that ridge over there, which is Vimy Ridge. And it's not a ridge. It's more like a bump in a field. And at the time, we're standing in the tunnels, and we're standing by the trench lines when we're about a half mile away from the ridge. And we're like, really? You have to lose all these soldiers to capture that ridge.
Yeah.
But then when we got over there, this little bump in a field actually did give a view of the surrounding area for miles and miles and miles.
Okay.
And back then, of course, there wouldn't have been trees all around because it would have all been farmland. And so I can see in that case why they wanted it so badly. But in so many of these other places, really the only point was to go forward.
Yeah.
And, you take 2 steps forward, and then a week later you take 2 steps back.
Right.
And a month later, you try it all again with the same results.
Right. And in many ways, this war went on so long and killed so many people because the forces were so evenly distributed. I mean, they were both very motivated and had the same kind of level of training and resource. And so they were too evenly matched, and it was hard. I mean, it would have been easier if they had just given up, but you don't want to do that, I suppose. But it's just crazy.
And then also the other problem was technology, as we were saying, had advanced so much, but the tactics hadn't. So the generals were still thinking, horses and hand-loaded guns. And yet the people on the front lines were dealing with tanks and machine guns.
Right. Oh, they were still.
And so it's just
they were ordering them to put on bayonets on their guns, and there were very few fights with bayonets by then.
Yeah.
But it was just the way you fought. They just kept doing that.
It's the way you do it.
That's the way. Yeah, that's the way you do it. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, what World War I did is that it impoverished all of these countries so much. And it impoverished Germany to the point where they really suffered afterwards much more than France.
Oh,
because France was still very rural. And so people just went back to the land and planted and did the best they could. Everybody, but Germany had a really hard time, and that laid the foundation for the Second World War. So,
oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me how much these countries that had, this is the time around Paris where life was good. People were lots of people were wealthy, but like the average standard of living was going up, and people got more and more education.
And people felt confident and hopeful for the future.
Right. They did. And then this war happens and they're all bled dry. They have nothing to rely on. A lot of them didn't even have a home to go to. It's just crazy how it threw so many people in poverty, and it was just a terrible idea. So if you ever wonder why Europeans are so not eager to be belligerent, that's why, because we lived through that. And I remember my grandparents, right? I remember my grandparents talking about this, like, why do we want war anyway? It's bad. Do anything you can to avoid war. That's the worst possible outcome. And so when today people say, well, you should spend more on defense and whatever, we're like, nope.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Traveling all around France, not just World War I, but also World War II, it's shocking how much the countryside was impacted.
Yeah.
When we were driving around the Arras area, we took mostly the country roads through there, and we'd be driving past fields and pasture, and then all of a sudden there'd be a small graveyard with maybe 100 graves of soldiers from World War I, and it would be meticulously maintained, and flags, and everything was spotless clean. And then we'd drive a few more miles and we'd see another small one.
Yep.
And it really brought home how that entire area suffered during those 4 years. And then when we went into the Wellington tunnels, they were saying how the tunnels were also used not just in World War I, but also in World War II. And it's just, they couldn't get away from it. For, multiple generations, people were suffering under war. So I can understand. Yeah. And I definitely appreciate the desire not to go there. Talk everything out again.
Right.
Try talking it out.
So tell me, how did your sons, did it change anything for them? Did it, what do you think they got out of this whole visit?
So as I said, they both enjoy history. My oldest son, who's 16, had just finished taking world history for 2 years. They took 2 years of world history. So he had a lot more understanding of World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
And so he was definitely kind of more informed ahead of time. My younger son hadn't covered it very much at all, but we'd go down into the tunnels and see what was going on. And they told us stories, like at Vimy Ridge, they were telling us that, the French and the Canadians and the British weren't the only ones tunneling. The Germans were also tunneling. And so they'd be tunneling towards each other's front lines, and periodically they'd break through on the other person's tunnel.
Wow.
And then there would be fighting in these. Well, but it's even worse than that. It'd be in the dark. These tunnels I could touch the ceiling on all these tunnels, and I'm only 5'4". So they're small tunnels. They were lit by candles, and they weren't just fighting hand to hand. They were fighting pickaxe to pickaxe in the dark. And, you see something like that, and you're standing in these tunnels and you're hearing those stories. And for both of them, it really brought home how horrific war is. And then when we saw some of these memorials, like when we went over to Thiepval, and it's just this immense memorial that it's towers over the trees around it. You just can't believe how huge it is. And when you get up to it, you see that it lists the names of only of the British dead who are missing, and that's 70,000 names from a 5-month battle.
See, that's crazy.
And so when they saw that, we had not planned on going to Thiepval, but we did at the recommendation of some other tourists. And it's so sobering that, you see the kind of coolness of tunneling, and then you see the end result at Thiepval of just rows upon rows of not just dead, but missing dead. So you wonder how many, there's cemeteries everywhere of the bodies they did find.
But then they don't know what happened to those. Did they get buried in a mass grave? They just don't know.
So you have these explosions and people would, when they were crossing no man's land, they'd get so shot up, and it'd sometimes be days before their bodies could be kind of reclaimed. That horrible things happened to these bodies, and so many people were never identified. They knew they were dead, but they were never identified.
Yeah.
Which is why there's so many of these memorials that just list name upon name, and those are the missing. And it's, we were standing there, and of course you look around we had no relatives who fought in World War I, but you look for people who have the same last name as you and stuff like that, and you just see, a whole row of people. And
and I'm sure there's plenty of listeners to this podcast who have relatives who fought in World War I. Americans who came over, or otherwise, I don't know, but I'm sure there's plenty of them.
So I think for them, it just really brought home how there are some neat things in war, the tunneling and the forts and all that, and it sounds exciting, but then you see these memorials, and it reminded them that war is permanent, and for so many people, it's also final.
Wow. Okay, so let's just recap briefly the places you enjoyed particularly much are, so you liked Fort Douaumont near Verdun, Fort Vaux, the ossuary. You loved the city of Arras and the tunnels. You liked Vimy Ridge, the Wellington tunnels, and Thiepval.
Yeah, and also the museum in Verdun. I thought was excellent.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, and when you're in Arras, you'll see all these tunnels. It definitely is worth going in them. We ended up going in 3 sets of tunnels. It is one of the neatest things we've seen, because who would think that you'd have these massive tunnel systems under a city?
War underground.
Yeah.
That just boggles the mind.
And
I've never seen them.
At the Wellington tunnels, they had this genius idea that they were going to combine all these medieval tunnels and take them to the front line, the German front line. And so the tunnelers did that, and then they loaded 20,000 troops into these tunnels and said, okay, sit here and wait quietly. We'll tell you when it's time to go. And they ended up waiting in these tunnels for 8 days.
Oh, no. Wow.
I know. And then the miners exploded entrances to the tunnels, and all these troops came swarming out and surprised the Germans, and were able to push them back a few miles. Right. Unfortunately, as we said earlier, it was all recaptured a short time later.
Yeah.
But just the thought of waging war like that is just so bizarre.
Yeah. It's not something we've heard lots about. So that would be a completely new, being exposed to a completely new thing. I've never been to anything like that. So that sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I'm very glad we went over there.
Excellent. Anything you wish you knew before you went?
Well, in some of your podcasts, you actually had a podcast about grocery stores.
Yeah.
And I kind of listened to it with half an ear, because we weren't planning on doing any cooking or anything. But when we were in Paris, we came up on the Trocadero. It was super hot. We bought some water. So a little bottle of water cost like €3. And, we kind of kicked ourselves for not being prepared. But we're thirsty and you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Well, later we were walking around, we saw a grocery store and we just walked in and we bought a 2-liter bottle of water for 70 cents.
Right.
So, I mean, it was just one of those things that we always made a point of finding a grocery store, and they're everywhere. They're just in between, this bakery and that tchotchke store.
Right.
And, we went in there and we really used the grocery stores quite a bit, just even for getting drinks. The boys would try all the different sodas that were there, and I'd get 2 liters of water that would last me the day for 70 cents.
Yeah. And the some of the grocery stores in France, I know it's shocking, but some of them even refrigerate some of the drinks. So you will find, if you know where to look, so you'll find the places where they sell like big quantities of water and Cokes and whatever. But then if you look around a little bit, you will find the one fridge where they have refrigerated drinks.
Yes. No, they weren't quite as refrigerated as we were expecting. They were more cool and not so much cold.
Right.
But, why would we be picky about that? It was just nice to get something to drink without having to take out a small loan.
Right. When you need a drink, you need a drink. Okay, that's good to know. Just plan on the grocery stores. Yep.
And then one of the things that I know a lot of people had mentioned and we were concerned about was using American credit cards. Mm-hmm. And so we called ahead, and our credit card company absolutely refused to give us a PIN.
Oh.
So we were concerned about using our card, and it worked without a problem everywhere except for gas stations.
Right.
So we had no problem on toll roads or anything like that. Most merchants, we had to sign a slip when we used it. So if it was a small purchase, the merchants did get a little annoyed. Mm-hmm. So usually if it was just, if it was under maybe €10, we'd pay in cash.
Right.
But at gas stations, we ended up having to use our ATM card.
Yes.
Which worked fine.
Yes, because your ATM card has a PIN.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So that worked without a problem.
Yeah.
And then
so you never got stuck. You never got stuck.
No,
right.
No, we never got stuck. We were concerned the first time we went on the toll road. We made sure we had a whole bunch of euros, and we tried but failed to go into one of the lanes that had a person. And so we were a little nervous when we put the credit card in, but it worked without a problem.
Right. So the toll booths with a person are getting very rare. So the next best thing, in France anyway, is to go under the green arrow, because strangely they have places where you have a credit card logo, and they won't take every credit card. They're meant to be faster lanes, whereas if you go with under the green arrow, they will take cash if you need to. They will take a bigger variety of credit cards. So I would say, if you're not sure if it's going to work, just go under the green arrow, or a person if you can find one. That's not very common. You can always call one.
Pardon?
You can always call one. They all have a call button. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my excellent French probably would not have helped in calling. But yeah, we were very happy to find that really we had no problems with our credit card. So that was a concern we had that we didn't have to have. Mm-hmm. Another thing you had mentioned, and we hadn't realized how serious you were, was that if you're outside of Paris, there is no food that you can buy anywhere between 2 and 7.
Correct.
People have lunch from noon to 2, and at 2 o'clock, everything closes. Right. And then there'll be places that are open like around 5. And one day, a couple times actually, we just got involved in what we were doing and didn't keep track of the time. And so we wouldn't realize it was lunchtime, and we'd miss lunch. And it's like, oh, we'll just get a snack somewhere. Well, that didn't work. Mm-hmm. And then one day we were just starving. It's about 5 o'clock, and we see all these restaurants open, and people are sitting out, having a glass of wine or something. And we thought, oh, we'll just go in there and we'll get an appetizer. No, there is no food until 7 o'clock.
That's right, because the cook doesn't even show up till 7. See, that's the thing.
We figured that out.
You have the restaurant is open, but they're just serving drinks. They're not serving So they might have a bag of chips for you, but that's about it, you know. And I'm not even sure they all have a bag of chips. So yeah, outside of outside of big cities, you have to eat at French meal times, you know. Otherwise, you'll go hungry.
And I don't know what like you consider as a big city. Like when we were in Arras and then also in Amiens and Reims, nothing between 2 and 7.
Yeah.
And we got better at that. You know, as we were going along, we'd make a point. It's like, okay, no, we can't do this museum now. We'll do it after lunch because we might not be hungry right now, but we'll be hungry later.
Yeah, that's the deadly thing. I'm not hungry right now. I'll eat when I'm hungry. It doesn't work in France. I'm sorry, it just doesn't, unless you are going to bring your own food, because they just close, you know. That's just how we are. We're supposed to eat on time, and so that's how it is. And big city. What do I consider a big city? I guess I would have thought Reims would be big enough to have some like 24/7, you know, service nonstop kind of thing. That's usually what they call it, service nonstop. But maybe not.
No, we couldn't find it. And we even thought like at least there'd be like creperies or something like that. And we did find a couple bakeries. And we'd get like the leftovers from the morning.
Right.
And, you know, so we had a couple lunches that were just like a chocolate croissant and a soda.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. That's a very good reminder. That's very good. Yeah, because people hear it, but they don't believe it. Because they're like, that's not possible. Why would they have the restaurant open and not serve food? Well, it's just because they don't have the cook.
When in America, a lot of places might not be serving their full menu, but they'll serve appetizers pretty much all afternoon long. And so we just figured it's like, okay, well, we can't get lunch or dinner. We'll just get a snack. And no, we would not get a snack. So we learned that you were not kidding. It's noon to 2 and after 7 and nothing else.
That's right. Good reminder.
Yeah. And then the last thing that, at least for Americans, was kind of odd for us, at least, was that we were there in the summer and most of the places we stayed didn't have air conditioning. Or if they did, they didn't cool things down as much as we like.
Right.
So we'd get into a hotel or whatever inn we were staying at, and the beds would have a big, massive duvet on them, but no top sheet. So Americans are used to having the flat sheet or the top sheet.
Yeah.
And in the wintertime, I would have loved that duvet. I mean, they look fantastic and big and thick and everything, but we're staring at the bed like, okay, it's 80 some odd degrees.
It's too
like,
hot, you know,
30 degrees Celsius. Why do you have this big down comforter on there?
Yeah.
And we may have brought top sheets with us because sometimes it's, you know, you're too hot when you go to bed, but sometime in the middle of the night you get a little chilled and you'd like to have just something on top of you.
Yeah.
But you don't want the big, you know, it's 20 degrees outside comforter.
That's actually a German thing. But you were close enough to Germany and, you know, the mix of cultures that happens around the border that I think in southern France, they would probably give you a top sheet, or if you ask for one, they would give it to you. But it's true. It's true that happens.
In Paris, we didn't have it. At the two chain hotels we stayed at, there was no top sheet. I think only 2 places had top sheets, and we'd celebrate those. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a top sheet.
The other thing French hotels don't give you is a washcloth.
Yeah.
So if you like a washcloth, bring it, because you're not going to get one as a standard
and
thing.
Hand towels. We didn't ever get hand towels.
No, yeah.
We got, you know, just the regular bath towel.
Yeah.
But, you know, every country is different. And that's part of the fun of it. I know we did not know much French. And I was definitely one of those people where it's like, we'll wing it. And when we get to a restaurant, we'll see what happens. You know, order something. What's the worst that can happen? And my husband and my boys were less willing to wing it on the meals.
Yeah.
They were kind of like, I'm hungry. I want to eat something I'd like.
Yes.
And so I would say be careful with translators. Our translator, that one that my husband downloaded, did mostly word by word. And so if you typed in a couple words, it would translate it as individual words.
Yeah.
And so we got to one town and all the restaurants had this thing on the menu called, it was like Ficelle Picardy. It was F-I-C.
Yeah, Ficelle Picarde.
Yeah.
It's a dessert.
And sometimes it was with cream and sometimes it was with actually vegetables.
Oh.
And we're looking at it and my husband put it in the translator and it came back as string Picardy. And so Picardy is a region in France. So it'd be like saying, like string New York City. And we're like, well, clearly they're not serving people string to eat. So the translator just was stuck on that. And we found out later it's basically a crepe that's filled with something.
Oh, it's not ficelle. I misunderstood. It's ficelle. Ficelle Picarde. Okay.
Yeah. And so my oldest son just kind of threw up his hands. He's like, I'll try it, whatever. And it was pretty good.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until we came back home when we found out exactly what it was. And I was trying to explain to a friend of mine, like this whole dilemma of like the translators. And they're like, well, but like, what's the big deal? And I said, if you're not American and you don't know much about American culture and you came over here and you looked on a menu and you put in your translator hot dog, you might think Americans like heat up a Labrador retriever and eat it, which we clearly don't do. So,
and the same way, French people don't eat string.
Exactly.
Even in Picardy, we don't eat string.
No string, and it was actually not too bad. But
yeah, it looks good. It looks like a
with
crepe.
The translator.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens is if it's a local specialty, then all the restaurants will have it. So
yep. We tried it like 4 or 5 of them, and we're like, well, it's got to be good because everybody serves it. And because it was a local specialty, it didn't explain what it was.
No.
So basically, I think my advice to people would be just roll with it. You're going to make a couple disasters, but you're also going to stumble upon some great finds, and you'll always have a good story at the end of the day.
Well, and I was in Saumur, which is not an area I know very well, and they had this weird bread. And all the restaurants were going on about, I can't even remember what it was called right now. But, it's just the bread. But if you put it in Google Translate wouldn't know to tell you that. There's no way. It wouldn't know what to tell you that. And that's one time where I know people say if the restaurant has pictures, it's a nasty restaurant. Well, not necessarily, because sometimes it's good to see the picture.
Nice.
Yes, sometimes you want the picture. And I would recommend, if you keep seeing something in a restaurant like that, instead of trying to say Google Translate it, just go into Google and just type it up and then look at the images. Because the images will, if you just read the text, it might not be very clear. But if you specifically ask for the images, then you'll see what it is. By now, it's they have images for everything pretty much.
Well, so we decided not to get a data plan for France because it was just.
That's why you got lost.
Well, no, we had the nav system in the car.
Ah, okay.
But we kept typing in, I guess there's 2 Beaumont Havel places.
Okay.
One's a cemetery and one's like the full-on kind of battle area.
I see.
And we were so close to the little tiny cemetery that it kept sending us there.
Right.
But so, we chose not to do the data plan because it was just, it was something like $12 a day, and we were there for 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And we figured, okay, whenever we have Wi-Fi, like in the hotel, we'll be fine with that. And we actually were fine. It might have been nice to look up what this item was on the menu.
Right.
But we also really didn't run into any. Yeah. Last time we were in France, there were no cell phones, and we had a great time. And I kind of think it was nice that they couldn't be constantly checking their phones because they didn't work.
Right. Oh, very good. All right. Did we forget to mention anything that you thought was particularly good or particularly not good? Is there anything you do not recommend because it was nasty?
No, I think overall we had a really good time. There were some things that were more interesting to my boys or more interesting to me. But overall as a family, we really enjoyed it. We had a good time. We saw a lot of things that were interesting and neat. The people overall were very nice, even when we stumbled upon, a small village where nobody spoke any English. The disaster of trying to order lunch was hilarious, and we ended up with a fabulous lunch, although when we ordered it, we had no idea what we were going to get. Yeah. And it was just all fun.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I've enjoyed our conversation. I have now new things I have to go see that I haven't seen in so long that I need to go back to them or go for the first time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the podcast, so I'm happy to be involved in it now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Bye.
Thank you, Alicia Rami, Catherine Rochester, Edward Desmarais, lovely French name, Naomi Hageland, Jennifer Bosch, and Eric Mitchell for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you so much for giving back. To support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon, and join us with no spaces or dashes. I have 129 patrons right now. I'm hoping to reach 200 by the end of the year, which is coming close. And with so many enthusiastic listeners, I know it can be done. So if you intend to support the show and haven't gotten to it yet, please do it this week. And thank you so much. You are truly making a difference. I will release new rewards for Patreon supporters before the next episode. If you're a patron, remember, log in to patreon.com once in a while. Look at your rewards. You can even switch rewards if you wish, so you don't miss anything. And thank you, Mary Ginley and Laura Knott, for your one-time donation. Much appreciated. For my personal update, I have a funny story for you. I got a call last week from a woman who lives near me, and she says she needs to learn English quickly, and could I help her and her boyfriend? Okay. I teach English. I've taught English to a lot of people over the years. Mostly I do it over the phone with corporate customers, and we use a website and we discuss and we do a lot of oral stuff. But occasionally somebody local will ask me, and, I enjoy doing it. It's face-to-face. But these neighbors of mine, they needed to learn English because their daughter is marrying an American, and it's happening very soon, and they want to be able to talk to people at the wedding. They are 52 and 57, and they know zero English. Now, when she told me this over the phone, I thought, no, surely you've done English at school, whatever. No, they really remember nothing. They took some English, but it's gone. And I have a lot of sympathy for them because, 26 years ago, my own parents were in the same situation. Their daughter was marrying an American, and they weren't sure, and they couldn't speak any English, and they weren't sure they could communicate with the in-laws and all of that. Although in my case, my husband spoke good French even years ago, and so that was an advantage. This young lady here, she's marrying an American who doesn't speak any French at all, so it's tricky. So I went to see them, and my attitude is, well, even if it's super simple English, let's just do this in English, right? Oh, you've never seen deer in the headlight faces like that. They were so freaked out. They they just hyperventilated. Like they were terrified, these poor people. They had taken English at school, but, obviously it was eons ago, and they really had bad experiences. And this is one of the reasons why I'm sharing this, is it's really easy for French people to have had a really bad experience with learning English at school. It's gotten better over time, but, 40 years ago, English teachers, they were mostly in the business of making sure you felt completely inadequate. And they weren't trying very hard to actually teach you anything about the language that you could use. And some people still teach English that way today, which is really pathetic. But I've been more since, and they are lovely people. They have relaxed. They have decided that, yes, we need to have very simple expectations. Just learn a few phrases, smile, relax, approach people in their own language, learn a few things you can use, and they will be very happy to meet you, etc. And this is why it's so important when you come to France that you start any interaction with anyone you encounter with bonjour and any French you know. It doesn't matter how much you know. Just try whatever you know. Because these people, a lot of French people have an allergic reaction when they hear English. And it's not an allergic reaction to you personally. It's an allergic reaction to the way they were taught English years ago. And it didn't work then. And they don't think they should have to be subjected to that anymore. So please try your French. And this is what I'm telling them too, is listen, you don't need to be fluent in English to get along with people. Just smile, say niceties that we're practicing in English right off the bat, and you'll be fine. It'll be a fun event for you as well. So a listener reached out to me recently saying he was trying to listen to an episode of the podcast on his computer, and he went to the website, he clicked on the play button, and it didn't work. And so he said after some investigation, he realized that he had an ad blocker that was messing things up. And yes, it can. So I'm passing on the message from Greg. If you have an ad blocker on your browser, on your computer, be mindful that it might be stopping things that you actually want to enjoy, like listening to a podcast episode. I test the play buttons on a regular basis. If it's not working, it's probably something wrong on your end. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about listening to the podcast. But remember, there are a lot of things that can be wrong with the computer and a lot of reasons why it wouldn't play something that you expect it to play. And if it doesn't play the podcast and it also doesn't play YouTube and it also doesn't play other things, well, in that case, obviously the problem is on your end. Please tell your friends about the show. You can send them to the website, joinusinfrance.com, or to the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, where we still have fun conversations every day. You can also find out more about the show on Pinterest. Search for Join Us in France Travel Podcast and Tours on Pinterest. I'm adding new pins all the time. I would love it if you would follow me and share those pins, because, it's a community. You can participate as much as you'd like. And anything you do to share the podcast is wonderful. And also, if you hear about someone who's coming to France soon, well, let them know that there's a good podcast. Really, that's all you need to do is tell them, oh, there's a podcast about France and it would really help me, and maybe it would help you too. And tell them it's called Join Us in France. And, they can search. They have Googling fingers. To connect with me, email Annie at joinusinfrance.com or leave a message at 1-801-806-1015. You can also join the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook. Do answer the questions as thoroughly as you can stand to, because spammers. Have a great week of trip planning, and I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2018 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.